All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tearing into a seriously fascinating text I recently came across. It's called Principia Educativa by Savio Antonio Vogt. Let me tell you, this book totally flips the script on how we think about global education. It basically peels back all the layers to show us the hidden, kind of invisible, mathematical and geopolitical architecture that's actually holding our nations together. Or, quietly causing them to fall apart.
Okay, let's dive right into this. You look at the news, right, or government reports, and on the surface, what we see looks incredible. We see rising literacy rates, massive university expansion, just explosive enrollment numbers everywhere. It looks like this massive global education boom. But beneath the surface, according to the data in Vogt's work, what is actually happening is a whole different story. We are seeing accelerated scientific migration, the silent collapse of mentorship chains, and a deepening, really worrying systemic fragility. So here's the core paradox we're dealing with today. That highly visible boom in global education, it's actually hiding a massive, dangerous vulnerability. Basically, expansion does not automatically equal resilience. So to really unpack all this, here is our roadmap for the explainer today. First up, the illusion of expansion. Then we'll hit civilizational infrastructure, followed by the architecture of fragility. After that, we look at the AM-Regulator framework, explore BRICS and global battlegrounds, and finally wrap up with surviving fragile frontiers. Let's get to it.
Part 1. The illusion of expansion, the historical funnel of learning. To really get why our modern obsession with just, building more schools is fundamentally flawed, we actually have to look backward. Historically speaking, education was never about mass scale. Think about the monasteries of medieval Europe, or the ancient gurukuls of India, Renaissance academies, or even those highly secretive Cold War STEM labs. Education was entirely about continuity. It was about preserving complex knowledge under extreme conditions of scarcity. But fast forward to our modern era of multipolar fragmentation, and we're seeing a really disturbing trend. This rapid, additive growth we love to brag about is frequently outpacing our actual ability to preserve and pass down knowledge. We're essentially building the walls of a house at record speed, but completely ignoring the foundation. Moving to Part 2, civilizational infrastructure, redefining the classroom. And that brings us to a massive paradigm shift. If we want to truly understand global power dynamics today, we have to look at education as civilizational infrastructure. I really want you to let that term sink in for a second. Civilizational infrastructure. Education is the silent scaffolding that determines whether a society can actually reproduce its scientific capability, maintain institutional trust, and keep its sovereign resilience across generations. It's not just some social service meant to churn out workers for the job market. No, it is the absolute bedrock of national security and systemic survival. Because think about it, if a country can't reproduce its own scientists, its own engineers and thinkers, its sovereignty is just an illusion. Part 3. The architecture of fragility. How systems actually break. So you might be wondering, how does civilizational infrastructure actually collapse? It's almost never a sudden dramatic event, like a building just falling down overnight. The reality is way more insidious. Vogt introduces this concept called scale-regulated aggregation, or SRA for short. And SRA basically tells us that systems break through tiny invisible leaks that accumulate multiplicatively right beneath that shiny surface of modernization we talked about. Think about it. One senior faculty member leaves a university. Seems pretty minor, right? One advanced lab closes down because of a funding cut. Totally manageable on its own. But under the SRA framework, these aren't just isolated hiccups. They aggregate. They silently eat away at those crucial mentorship structures until suddenly the entire system is dangerously fragile. And get this, there's actually a hard mathematical tipping point for this collapse. It's called the Fisher threshold, and it sits at exactly 35%. When outward migration within those really continuity-sensitive sectors, we're talking doctoral students, advanced researchers, when that exceeds 35%, fragility starts accumulating way faster than the system can adopt. It is literally a statistical point of no return. The repeated instability just pushes the system right over the edge, causing a nation's educational framework to irreversibly fracture. Just boom. Part 4. The AM-Regulator framework, balancing the scales. Okay, so if fragility builds up through all these invisible little leaks, how do nations actually protect themselves? Well, let's translate some of this dense math into something a bit more concrete. Vogt's solution is the AM-Regulator framework. AM stands for additive and multiplicative.
Now, those additive forces, those are the visible growth metrics we mentioned earlier. More students, more shiny new buildings. But, and this is absolutely crucial, you have to temper that visible expansion with multiplicative forces. These are the hidden resilience mechanisms, things like faculty stability, unbroken mentorship continuity, and rock-solid finding resilience, all mapped across 11 distinct dimensions. Without that multiplicative regulation loop acting as an anchor, your additive expansion is literally just building a giant hollow house of cards.
Part 5. BRICS and Global Battlegrounds, Geopolitics of the Classroom.
Let's look at how this intense tug-of-war between additive growth and multiplicative continuity actually plays out in the real world. We're going to use some objective data from the BRICS nations between 2023 and 2026, straight from the source material. Take India, for example. They achieved this massive demographic expansion in university enrollment, but simultaneously, they ran into severe doctoral leakage, meaning their absolute top talent is migrating outward. Now contrast that with China. They actively integrated retention systems directly into their advanced manufacturing and aerospace sectors, which created incredibly strong stability. Then you have Brazil, where we saw huge visible institutional expansion, but it unfortunately masked some deep regional inequality between the big urban centers and rural peripheries. Meanwhile, Russia aggressively structured its universities and demonstrated a surprising ability to reproduce scientific capability even under intense sanctions pressure. Each of these nations perfectly illustrates that exact battle between visible scale and hidden resilience.
And hey, speaking of the BRICS nations, there was a truly surprising fact that jumped out of this research. South Africa actually utilized its advanced observatory and astronomy sector as a continuity anchor. It's fascinating. Even while dealing with broader structural and regional inequalities, this highly specialized, super niche scientific infrastructure stabilized their mentorship cycles. It extended scientific reproduction way out, well beyond the typical metropolitan hubs. It totally proves that having targeted, hyper-resilient institutions can literally anchor an entire national system. How cool is that?
Part 6. Surviving Fragile Frontiers, Learning Under Fire. But we have to ask, what happens when we shift our focus to regions that are challenged by actual physical conflict? Vogt calls these areas fragile corridors. We're talking about places like Kashmir, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. In these conflict zones, you don't even have the luxury of debating expansion versus continuity. I mean, basic availability doesn't even exist. Communities there are forced to literally improvise laboratories out of pure scarcity. They have to construct the very basic availability of technology while under fire before continuity can even become a conversation. This right here is where the true, brutal test of civilizational infrastructure actually happens.
So, what is the ultimate takeaway from all this data? It's understanding the stark, massive difference between expansion and continuity. Expansion is additive. It's highly visible. Honestly, it looks fantastic on a politician's dashboard. But without regulation, it leaves a nation highly vulnerable. Continuity, on the other hand, is multiplicative. It's hidden away in quiet mentorships, in steady funding, in talent retention. And it is the only thing that guarantees true, long-lasting sovereignty. Visible expansion without hidden continuity doesn't build strength. It simply produces national dependency.
I really want to bring this explainer to a close by reflecting on what I think is an incredibly powerful realization from Vogt's text. He writes, "Education is tested most severely not in abundance, but in fragility, not in urban squares, but in conflict frontiers, where continuity must be improvised from scarcity." It's profound, isn't it? Sovereignty isn't just something defended at a nation's physical borders. It is actively reproduced every single day within its educational pipelines, very often under the absolute most difficult circumstances imaginable. It kind of completely changes how you look at the local school down the street or the university in your town, doesn't it? Because they aren't just buildings anymore. They're the silent scaffolding of our entire future. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on today. When you look past the shiny new buildings and those record-breaking enrollment numbers, how secure is your own civilizational infrastructure, really? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep asking the big questions.